Fractional reserve banking. When you put money into the bank, all of your money does not have to stay in the bank. Some is kept in reserve, and the rest of it can be loaned out. And that's how banks make their money. They take money that is actually in your savings account. There's not a stack of money with your name on it sitting in the vault waiting for you to come back to it. They have to keep some in reserve. The rest of it can be loaned out to other banks or loaned out as mortgages to other people so that the banks can make money, and that's why you earn interest on your bank accounts. Reserves refers to any money that has been deposited in the bank and not loaned out yet. The Federal Reserve Bank sets the required reserve, or the required ratio, which is the percentage of money banks are required by law to keep in those reserves. And the fractional reserve banking is the banking system we have in America, where banks only must hold a fraction of all deposits in reserve. To understand the basics of banking, the banks look at money as two different ways. They have assets, that's what the bank owns, and liabilities, what a bank owes in money. So if you put $100 into the bank, that is a liability for them. They owe you that money. Now let's pretend that you deposit $100 into the First Bank of Econville. The required ratio is 10%, or 0.10 as a decimal. You would see the following statement from the bank. The reason that your $100 is a liability is because they will eventually owe you that money back. It's something that they're liable for, that they have to make sure they have that money eventually to pay you back your $100 deposit. Now, of that $100, they have to keep some in reserve, the required ratio. So we take your $100, multiply it by 0.10. That will give us the required reserves, or the money that they have to keep in reserve, which ends up being $10. So we'll put into reserves, they have $10, they have it on hand, that's an asset. The rest of that money, we had your $100 deposit minus the $10 they have to keep in reserves, will give us $90 that they can loan out. They can loan out up to $90, but they don't have to loan it all out. But for the most part, what we're going to talk about is they're going to keep the required reserves in the assets, and they're going to loan out any excess reserves as loans. Now let's say the First Bank of Econville, when you deposited your $100, they decide, you know what, we're going to loan out $90 to the Second Bank of Worchester. The Second Bank of Worcester now must keep some in reserves, the same 10%, and can loan out the rest. We have now created money that did not exist. So, if we have the $90 deposit in the Bank of Worcester, they owe that money to the First Bank of Econville. Multiply it times 0.10, the reserve ratio. We get $9 they must keep in reserves. The rest of that money, 90 minus 9, $81, they can loan out. And again, they can loan out up to $81, but they don't have to loan it all out. But usually when we talk in economics, we're going to say that they loan out all of it. Now, the only money that actually exists is the first $100 you deposited. The rest of the money was created. The First Bank of Econville created $90 from your $100 deposit, and then the Second Bank of Worcester created another $81. This is how the banking system increases the money supply. This can continue on until banks are loaning each other just pennies. But there's an easier way to find out just how much money has been created, and we call that the money multiplier. The money multiplier is the amount of money that the banking system can create given an initial deposit. The Fed uses the money multiplier to prescribe the exact monetary policy actions and changes in the money supply. So we use the equation M equals 1 over R, where M is the money multiplier, R is the reserve ratio as a decimal. So in our problem from before, the reserve ratio is 10%. So M would equal 1 over 0.10, and then eventually we can say that M is equal to 10. So whatever money is deposited into the First Bank is able to be multiplied by 10, and that's how the Federal Reserve Bank can decide or determine that's how much of the increase in money supply there will be in the future. So from our initial deposit of $100, using the multiplier, we can conclude that the increase in the money supply was $100 times the money multiplier was 10, gives us $1,000 increase in money supply. Therefore, blank was created from the initial increase in reserves. So how much of that money was actually created? Well, your initial deposit actually exists. That's $100. So we would take the total increase in the money supply, $1,000, minus the initial deposit, $100. So only $900 was created because your first $100 deposit is actually there. The rest of the money was created from your initial deposit.